Good evening, everyone. This is the joint Rutland Town Select Board and Planning Commission meeting. I think we all have name tags, so I'm not going to go around the room and introduce unless you really want me to. Thank you very much. Not only for this, we're here tonight to talk about the short-term rental draft ordinance. But I haven't shown up at planning commission meetings lately because I've realized how much work the select board has been shoving in your direction. And I wanted you to know that we're really, really grateful for all the extra work we've asked you to do, and you've come through admirably. So, and here, here's another one. So thank you for your good work. We're grateful. We'll try not to muck it up too much. But that's what we're here to discuss. What we want to get out of the short-term rental ordinance and what some of your ideas were behind it. So, trying to think Bill has prepared a chart with comments. And I think one of the things that Matt really wanted to do tonight, we'll blame it on you, is to do kind of a line by line review and see if we understand why certain things were put in and what your thinking was, and whether anything needs to be edited, deleted, added to, or so on. So why don't we start with, unless somebody else has a better idea. I will say that, was that a hand up? Okay.
No, but go ahead.
All right. I will say that the select board had a vote on, the motion to not proceed with short-term rental at this time, and that vote failed. So conversely, that means we do want to do something with short-term rental at this time, but we need buy-in from all of the select board members and your input on this as well. So that's kind of where we are. Was a 3-2 vote. So work with us here and we'll see if we can come up with something most of us can live with. Okay, Matt.
So I'm pretty sure I'm the swing vote. So the whole purpose of this meeting is just to cater to my whims.
How much do you want?
I can start. That's dinner. Okay. No, but I think for me, I've got a number of comments, but I think the biggest issue for me is educational. The stated purpose for the ordinance is really health and safety. And we have a concerned citizen who's going to tell us to vote against it. And so I guess what I really am trying to understand is the requirements for the fire inspection aspect in particular, what those actually, what sort of burden does that actually put on the landowner, property owners? What applies to long-term versus short-term? And, is this something that is leveling the playing field between those two, or what? Because I see this contains a requirement for an inspection, and then I think, okay, well, what does that mean? I mean, are they required to do everything that the fire inspector says they should do, or is that just a recommendation, or what sorts of things are they likely to be required to do? Is this a de facto way of preventing most people from doing this, or what? So I don't know if that's something that Bill wants to speak to, or anybody else on the planning commission who's researched it and can educate us on it.
Bill's been on a safety inspection.
Yeah. So the fact that they're renting opens them to needing those steps from the Division of Fire Safety to having an inspection like that process, even like that process by itself opens it up. There are things that, and I don't have a specific list, but there are things that fire safety will find that are mandatory and that are advisory. So the advisory ones, they say, we're telling you this is an issue. We're not going to say you don't pass, or we're not giving you something, but this is something that, like, a railing would be an example, like a handrail. Say, like, it's not the right kind of handrail. It's up to you if you want to change it. But that way down the road, if someone falls and they say, well, the handrail was incorrect, they were advised. So it's an advisory thing for safety. So we you said, like, is this a way to kind of discourage people? I actually, like, I really don't, I'm really absolutely not trying to discourage anyone with this process.
So back up one step. Did you say everyone's supposed to be doing it now if they're renting? They're already.
What Kevin has said is that many owners don't realize that renting triggers the need to obtain a public building permit. Just the act of renting, whether they go seek it, we don't enforce that. Like, we don't have an inspector, we don't have anybody that follows up on this.
Public building permit is a fire.
It's from
Safety
yes.
thing.
Yeah, once you start renting out property, you fall into a different category than.
Correct.
Whether it's long-term or
Or
short-term,
Yeah, that's,
doesn't matter.
yeah, that's the same for either,
Or bed
is
and
equitable
breakfast
between the
or.
any of them,
Yeah.
any of them, in. So that's one of the things.
So that's an existing requirement that applies to both.
Yes.
Right. In all we're,
Maybe people in both categories aren't doing it, but they should be.
Exactly.
most people don't even see that. Like, if you have a house and you have a nice apartment over your garage and it has a kitchen and a bedroom and a living room and you rent that to someone and you're technically that has to have, it falls under that rental thing. And it is now part of that fire safety inspection. And we're not even addressing the long-term
No,
rentals
we're
with
not.
this.
Well, right.
We're just
which-
looking at the short-term ones because that's something that jumped out in front of us.
I mean, right, which maybe that's something that maybe
We
short-term
should
people
too.
will complain about that and say, well, if you're going to require us to do this, even though it's already required, but you're now going to monitor, you're going to add a local layer of monitoring on it.
Right.
You're adding a burden to us that these other people don't have to.
Well, that may
Carry.
be ordinance number 2. If, because there are a lot of people that have apartments in their homes or in an adjacent building or over a garage and they're renting those out and they are subject to the fire safety.
Some of them could be the same people. I mean, the difference between short and long term is whether it's more or less than 30 days.
It's right.
So, I mean, if you're renting to a traveling nurse, who's
They're there
here for
usually
a few
longer.
months,
That's usually
that's long term.
right. That's more of a long term and those things should be safe for the public. And most communities, I don't think this is something that's new. And that's why I think it's so controversial and why people are up in arms in it, because it's the short-term rentals are relatively new. This has, there have been times when people, like, if you work for a construction company, you might rent a room somewhere if you came down and worked for 3, or you stay at a motel for a week, but some places people stay at, somebody has a house or a room over their garage. So you're there 4 nights a week and you're working a job and you go home. So that technically would be a short-term rental under these, I do believe. But
And Bill, there's some obligatory parts of the inspection as well.
There are, like, I didn't get a list from when I went with them. I don't have a list of, like, here's the full list of mandatory and then some things that are advisory. Like, I've only gone on one so far. But they do have things that they like. The one that I went on was an interesting one. It's a much higher capacity occupancy. So they didn't require like a sprinkler system, but they did require that actually an alarm system be installed, a fire alarm system be installed, which they were like, fine. Like, the person was like, okay. So it wasn't even but
AC,
that's going to be something they're going to follow up on before they sign off on
we'll
it.
shut the
So,
door because it
but
doesn't work.
depending upon the occupancy number, it can trigger
Freeze.
other
Well, no, but it
requirements.
should be
And as you
separate
get higher, then
temperature,
they do
so
become required.
See,
So, like, where they may say, hey, you may want to think about a fire alarm system,
It's
you
given
get above, I think
temperature,
it's
and you
12,
keep-
and they say you have to have one, you get above 16 or 18, and it's a sprinkler system, and that's just it, you have to have it, so.
So Matt, the planning commission considered this and having an inspection. If we start with short-term rentals, okay, we start with them, but we see that as a health and safety addition to what the town is doing, what the town requires. It's more protection for people.
And, you know, it's, I'm not sure what you meant by the educational component of this.
We're educating me right now.
And
that's
the other
the
thing, Barb, that we're
But-
educating is the renting public out
Right.
there to what their responsibilities are.
Right.
Because the only thing that I've looked through this, not as good as I would have liked to, but I have, and the only thing that jumped out at me a little bit where this starts to become maybe regulatory, and I didn't think we were going to go there, was when you get to, under the section 2, which says purpose, and it just says, item 4 is limit long-term rentals from being replaced with short-term rentals. That I would have, I don't think that should be our goal. We should not. And I think people will find fault with that, because what we're saying is we are now going to say we can only have this many in town, and you take away that free enterprise thing, and that's what people are going to bark
Oh,
at.
I was going to beef that up.
You want to make it more
Well,
stringent?
I want it more clearly stated that we're also looking to monitor the conversion rate to see if there is a point at which we say we need residences for local people.
Right, I think that what I want to get away from is us trying to put a limit. It's kind of with the energy thing, the state says there's so many megawatts the community can have, and then when you get to that point, you can't have any more, or I think we should stay away from that. And it was interesting in our last one meeting when we discussed this, when, and Sharon's not here to, talk about it, but she did mention in that meeting that she was concerned about this very fact that long-term rental properties are being, turned into these short-term rentals because they tend to be a little more lucrative, and you have a different turnover. But she was against the ordinance. So I wanted to talk to her more about that, because that's kind of contradictory, because if you're going to try to limit that, then you've got to have something. And that is exactly what that item 4 says. And that was one of the only things that really jumped out me, is that, do we want to go down that road?
I wasn't going to put a number, and I was going to say monitor the conversion rather than
And then if it looks
Yeah.
like there's an issue,
Yeah.
so we could change the wording of that, but that's just something where it starts to look like the town is trying to say, okay, we can have 150 of these units, and if you want to be 151, you've got to do something different, or we're not going to let you. And I don't think that was the intent of this ordinance, to tell people
I
you
guess
can or
that's
can't.
a question back to Barbara. Was that conversion thing a factor?
Go ahead, Dana.
Yeah.
This is a point to which I spoke to a large extent, both with your perspective and Joe's in mind.
Oh.
Because I don't think that it's our responsibility to do that, but I do think that it's our responsibility to be mindful of that.
Okay.
Because it could be at cross purposes with our economic development initiatives to try to bring people into the town if we don't have the housing stock for them to actually come. So my point at that point in time was that it was not regulatory. I agree with you, Joe and Mary, that perhaps we just changed
The
word.
wording
We
that,
did that on a number of other things as
Right.
we, the planning commission, went through that.
Yeah.
But I think that it's important to keep it in the purpose, because if it's not there, and there's nothing other than that being stated as a purpose for us to be mindful of, and in the purpose of educating the entire town population about why this is an important ordinance, it strikes a balance in terms of awareness of what we're trying to do in terms of economic development and bring prosperity, not only to the town, but to the region in which we play a major role. But it also creates that mindfulness that there's leveling the playing field, as Matt has been talking about, between long-term, short-term, and finding a happy medium.
right, and
that
also
benefits the entire town.
the
Yeah.
rules that apply to this, the fire. That's what when we had that one meeting we had several weeks ago about, the ones that are slipping under the radar,
Mhm.
And I'm very glad that this group, we aren't pounding on the Airbnbs, because nowhere in here does this even address them. And this, not the intent of this ordinance to regulate them, control them, or dictate to them what to do. And there are short-term rentals that are basically traveling under the radar. They're not complying, and that this will bring it out. And I think that for the life safety codes that are out there, I think that's important.
So Jill.
So Norm's been trying to be recognized, so I better, Norm used to be my landlord. I just, let's put that right out there.
I tried to make it a short-term rental, but I lost. How many years?
A long time.
And wonderful. I think one thing that Bill brought to our attention is that the Airbnb rentals are regulated by the state. Is that correct? There's some registration requirements.
No, they're the self-regulated, but they're one of the better.
But if they're operating as an Airbnb, there's a criteria of standards
Yes.
they have to follow.
Yeah.
And that's
And
what
so they're already kind of,
that's what
we
I'm
just
getting-
want to know that they are.
Yeah.
Now, we're not going to tell them what to do because they already know what to do.
That's what I think that's part of the distinction here that's important, is those that are more of a regular commercial situation, there's some oversight by the Airbnb crew. These are under the radar thing, where there's no regulation at this point, no protection of the tenants, no protection of the neighborhoods. And I think that's what our goal was, if I understood. And at the same time, respecting people's rights to earn an extra buck.
Right.
It's a delicate balance, but safety is critical. And
Hey. Andy,
I'd like to go back just quickly on where Bill left off. The main things that the state is coming in and looking for, and I've done a number of conversions in Killington to short-term rentals, and then I have a number of customers in the area that are long-term renters. And the main thing that the state comes in and looks for is smoke detection, fire safety, and egress window size.
Yeah.
And I think I don't think anyone can make a case for that anyone should be exempted from any of those regulations in any way, shape, or form. And the second thing I'd like to say is that the same people, when I talk to them, there's market forces that are driving the switch from long-term rentals to short-term rentals right now. And that has to do with the fact that, according to the people I talk to, if you have a bad tenant, the best you can do to get them out is 3 months. And that if the tenant cooperates with you. If the tenant doesn't cooperate with you, it can be much, much longer. So therefore, that's just one force that's changing it. And of course, the second force is the fact that we've taken so many what should be short-term rentals, motel rooms, and now converted them into whatever you want to call it, COVID housing or whatever. And so we've lost
Here.
at least a couple of hundred rooms, I believe, here in Rutland Town and Rutland City, that should be on the market for skiers and transient people that aren't here anymore. And so therefore they're going into, naturally that creates a demand for the short-term rental market. So
Yep.
it's,
And not to Dana, but that short-term rentals, they are per night stays or however we get, that is a higher dollar figure
Yeah.
than, and so if you have an apartment or you have something and you're looking at renting an apartment for $1,500 a month or $2,000, and you can maybe make twice that if you rent it out in increments of 3 or 4 nights, because they are normally a higher per night stay. That one on Abbey Lane.
Yep.
So what were the numbers that they're planning on? Those are the
Oh,
3 gentlemen or 3 individuals that own it from out of state, bought that property.
individuals, one from the central part of the country, one from the south, and one from the west coast. The property manager lives very locally, and he was telling us about it. He says they own a lot of these around the country, and he says their typical thing is a 3-night minimum at $12,000 a night.
12,000.
Yes,
For the entire building?
for the entire complex.
Yeah,
there's.
So if any of you know that, that's
buildings.
the Cynic's house that was off
Oh,
of
yeah.
McKinley Avenue on the sharp corner.
Yep.
So that's what they're looking at. They would be renting that house and property. That's 10 months or 8 months of renting an apartment or, so this is, and they're doing this, what'd you say, per weekend?
And how many
Haven't started yet.
how many individuals are allowed, do
Well,
you
that
know?
was up for debate because what some of the rooms they wanted to use as bedrooms, the inspector was like, nope, that window's too small. And come to find out, there actually is an active Act 250 permit for that property, which we now are looking at from a different angle, like, are these things even allowed? So that's not even clear yet. So that's uncovered something that we weren't even realize as part of this process. And I'm sure they may not even realize as part of that process that they have to comply with those. So it started some interesting conversations, but
So let me go back to how's your education going?
Well, great. Another
But the thing is
Sure.
too,
Look at what you started, yeah.
so part of it was the effective date. And I had incorrectly put that in there in the previous draft. So this one got correct, but having it take effect July 1st of next year to allow us to go out and find how many there are in town and reach out to every single owner well in advance and say, here's what's coming next year down the road. So that way we give people the time to ask, to get informed and what they need to do. So exactly for that.
but that
So,
one
no,
property, Mary,
back-
just to interrupt, not to interrupt, but that one property, because it's an Airbnb, it's where it'd be listed. You can see the difference where they already know there's rules
Mhm.
and they're already trying to comply with.
Yes,
And
yes.
so for them, this is for us, right? We don't have to really tell them anything because they already know
Yeah.
and so it just irked me that night that's all we heard about. And that's not what we were after.
Okay.
Okay, well, now you've just sparked another question, but so Airbnb itself as a company,
Yes, yeah.
does it require a fire inspection or no? They're just, when we talk about them regulating, they're regulating it based on reviews, right? Pretty much. It's
They are
just,
they are connecting renters with property owners.
right.
Right.
So the property owner provides a
what they
bad experience, they get a bad review. So
Correct.
they're incentivized, but they don't have to. I mean, they can,
And Airbnb is one company. There's
Right.
about 25.
you could have people that come in and are totally riotous and trash the place and they give the host a great review for letting them do it. That doesn't help the
No,
community,
It
but
reviews both ways.
Right.
The
Yeah,
host
you
also
can certainly
reviews
do
the.
that.
the
Right.
right, but
Okay.
they may not care if they're getting paid enough money.
No, they
But
care.
I had another point, but go ahead, Dana, you can.
Going back to the whole purpose of health and safety, Airbnb does not require them to focus on health and safety. That's another thing that we brought up and debated at great length. That's how we got to unanimity on the planning commission. That the real focus, and that was thanks to Andy who made that pitch, because at one point we were divided in terms of how much we should go forward and how much we should solicit additional information before going forward. When we focused on the health and safety, I actually made a recommendation that we haven't yet implemented, and that was under the purpose of the ordinance, health and safety, which is now currently number 5. Not that it's hierarchically ranked, but it should be number 1. I made that comment months ago. We just haven't put it in number. Am I going to care about it? I just want to make sure it's there. But given this conversation, I don't think that it should be number 5. I think it should be number 1. And that was my feedback.
So,
Well, it
so
is,
the planning
basically.
commission was
Basically.
unanimous in recommending this draft to us. Am I
That's correct.
correct? So you've got some divergent views here, I would guess, but you still sent this along to us. So, okay.
After a few months' work.
Well, I'm sure.
Well,
yeah.
once you start picking it apart, you start seeing things from somebody else's point of view, and then you start thinking, oh, well, that I didn't think of that.
Yeah.
So that's why,
So we're back to Matt.
So now I think it's appropriate to sort of go back to this equity issue. So take Abbey Lane as an example. If they're renting that place at $12,000 a night, if they just decided to do $12,000 a month for a year and rent it for $144,000 and call it a long-term rental to somebody,
they
then
would.
we're not doing anything, right?
Not-
I mean,
right.
so can we?
That's why
If I were that
this
property
is-
owner, then I'd
this-
be saying, well, you said this
This
is
health
about,
and safety component has always been left to the state and Department of Fire Safety.
that's my point. So if you're a long-term,
Don't bring it to their attention. They don't go looking for it.
Yeah, but then
So-
we get back to Matt's question.
it's
is
a
how-
short-term rental person
we out
would say, why are
everybody?
you
Yeah.
going to require a local supervision of this issue that's now not going to apply to anybody who goes more than 30 days on a rental? Well,
Well, it does, but it does.
It does.
They still, even, it doesn't matter if they're short-term rental or long-term rental.
the state does, but we're not, this ordinance doesn't do it.
And then that's
And-
only,
And that was kind of another topic that has come about what about the other ones? But that gets in, so like JP is our second constable, he does, if a renter calls with an issue in an apartment, he
Mhm.
goes, he with the Department of Health does an investigation.
He's our health officer.
Yeah.
That's wearing
So
that
there
hat. He
actually is a
does.
process
Yeah.
already, we have a local process for long-term rentals, and he does report, he has reported issues directly.
It's a question of jurisdiction, right? Whether it's the state's jurisdiction or whether there's no jurisdiction, and whether we can take jurisdiction over where the state is not actually going to step in.
so.
And that was one of the
If I
arguments that
remember right,
focused on.
and this goes back, and I don't know, I haven't been involved with this for about 9 years, but my term is fire chief. The state does the inspections in Rutland town because we do not have, the city of Rutland
City's
has a
got it,
building
yeah.
inspector. And that person's job is to enforce the life safety codes, to inspect all this. And so the way it works is that any buildings in town, the state has to do it because we don't have, it's just like the state policed Rutland town until we hired our own, so if the town were to have a building inspector and they would be in doing this, that would be their job. So now that we no longer rely on the state, and like probably with most state agencies, they're reactive more than proactive. They're not going to be able to come into every community because there's a lot of communities that don't have, so that would be one way where the state would be out of this, where if the town had its own, it's done by, and there was a whole formula. Bob Schlachter used to do this for the state of Vermont. And at one point, he had offered that if the town wanted to hire him full-time as fire chief, he would do fire chief and building inspector, and we would basically have the state out of it. And then these things would be done locally. So that's why we rely on the state, because we do not have a building inspector. But any community that has a building inspector,
I don't think that's totally right, Joe. As electricians, we still have to pull a state permit.
that's right.
For in the city as well, Joe.
That's right. That's a total different thing. That's construction. This is building inspect. This is going out, somebody that, well, it
It's
is.
still a life safety issue, Joe. So I don't.
Right.
I don't think so.
You have to have a state permit to do wiring in somebody's house, to do
Yeah.
plumbing in somebody's house, to do whatever that. Those are done, but they were used to be under the Division of Labor and Industry.
Right.
And that because the town doesn't have a building inspector, this is inspections. This is not
You just said
construction.
building inspection, though.
Huh?
You just said building inspect.
We don't have anybody that in
I
town,
realize it's construction, but if somebody wants smoke detectors put in,
right?
that's not construction, in my opinion.
No,
I
that isn't.
have to pull a state permit.
Right. So, but
So
there's
that-
nobody to go in, there's nobody in
So
Rutland town.
what's the point of this?
My
here?
point of this, I was just saying, I just think it was a little misleading that the city would not, you would supersede the state.
You're not. The city has a building inspector that goes in and tells you as an apartment owner, you need smoke detectors here, you need this and that. Then they hire you, Jerry Stearns, to go put them in.
Yeah.
And when you do that, you have to get a permit from
I
the
do.
state of Vermont
Correct.
to install
They
it.
have to inspect it.
But it's the city or whomever that they do the initial inspection. In the town, we don't have anybody
Well,
doing that.
there's.
So
let
you're
me-
not going to find
Let
these
me add
shortcomings.
my little bit
Yeah.
of knowledge. I used to do quite a bit of residential real estate. And in the city, the easy thing when a residence was going to change hands, you'd ask the building inspector to go and provide, if they could, a clean certificate of occupancy.
Correct.
You didn't close without a clean CO. And if there were things to be done, and the building ordinance required before there was a transfer of property that this inspection occur and that it be clean. So that's what we would look for. And if there was GFI outlets were a common one. They always had to be changed and that sort of thing. So I'm used to this, and this is more like the inspection to make sure everything is there rather than any heavy construction.
Right.
So
Yeah, I
Yeah.
just think we're basically saying that, I guess we're basically saying the same thing two different ways.
okay.
I understand that that the city has a building inspector
Yeah.
that you can get a certificate of occupancy. But I just wanted to make it kind of clear that if there was, even if the town was to have a building inspector, It doesn't supersede anybody though, regardless whether you call it construction or maintenance.
Yeah.
You still need a state inspection. Therefore,
Okay,
that person is important in the city, and was an easy, clean way of transferring
Very.
real estate. And
very,
and in fact, most people would seek to do that before they'd have the state come, of course,
absolutely.
because it tends to be easier. But I just wanted to make that distinction that
Gotcha.
there still needs to be that state, Department of Fire Prevention has jurisdiction over all of it.
Okay. So now we've been at this for half an hour. And where do we go from here? We haven't started going through the document. We've gotten some ideas about jurisdiction. And we've pinpointed some things, some areas that we wanted to focus on. What's next? Do we start our step by step? Yes.
I'm glad you said that because I'm puzzled. My impression is that the planning commission was asked by the select board to draft an ordinance. We did that. The select board reviewed it and had some questions. And what we've been spending on time on, I think, is a decision that's already been made. I mean, so far, whether this is right or wrong or too much or too little, I thought that had been settled in terms of they asked us to do it. And so I'm glad we're moving on to specifics.
Well, I think this, we
I've-
wanted your input.
Yeah,
That's-
I voted for the planning commission to look into an ordinance. I don't think it was, the motion was specifically said to draft an ordinance. I think it was look into an ordinance.
Okay.
If I remember
Way back.
correctly from back then.
Okay.
Some of that stuff I tend to remember for weird reasons. But that's just to answer that question. I think that's what that motion was.
Okay.
But I mean, we're here now.
We're here.
I think at some point, we must have authorized them to go to the next step.
Yeah,
Somewhere
I
in
can't
there,
remember where that
and
was.
we're here. So the point being, if you had, I would go, maybe at this point, I mean, we pointed out on this one page that number 4 could be reworded just slightly different. So that's something we might want to change and then go to the next
All
thing
right.
and
So
see if there's other items in
line
here.
by line, page
I
by
guess.
page. All right. All right. And this, I mean, things will come up as we do it, and we will probably have more policy questions about why the planning commission did what you did.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think that's what we expected to be here for.
Okay, good.
To answer those type of questions. So we've already been through this line by line a number of times.
Can you do it one more time, maybe?
If
I
we-
did, Mary. I did. These are my notes. from
Okay,
Friday.
good.
If the planning commission doesn't have a lot of grief, then it's the 4 of us that have questions.
Mhm.
Maybe, we need to be the ones. I mean, like I said, that was the only thing that really jumped out at me that had I didn't care for that wording.
So
The,
I can go on with more line by line. If you want.
Okay.
So I don't have too many.
okay.
Bill already addressed a number of them that were just small.
Okay.
Edits, he already put them in there.
Are we
So,
still on the first page? Are we?
All right, well, let's start with the first
Yes,
page.
yes.
We were doing.
so I guess just to recap where I think we are on the purpose subject is health and safety is important, but it's not the only issue. There's these other purposes. If health and safety were the only issue, it seems to me we would want an ordinance that applies the same to long-term and short-term. Now, I don't say that as criticism of this, because as you said, you were asked to do it. That was before my time. So I'm getting up to speed. I apologize. But I think people will want to not understand because we're going to have to explain it to the public if we adopt this. So I think maybe that's the summary of the first half hour is health and safety is important. We now understand better, the jurisdictions and so forth that apply. But, long-term, rental people at this point are not going to be required to report to us that they're complying with the state the way the short-term people would. All right. So, then
So are we done with page 1?
done with that. And as far as I'm
I'm not
concerned,
done with page 1.
Okay, wait. So, okay, what you got?
So number 2,
Yeah.
in the purpose, I'm just curious how would this ordinance, how are we going to balance the desires of residents to preserve the traditional peace and quiet of residential neighborhoods? So are we going to not give Airbnb permits because we the neighborhood doesn't,
Short-term rental.
short-term, sorry.
Yeah.
We get into that. Short-term rental permits because the neighbors don't want it?
That's another regulatory factor, right?
You know,
I mean, that's
and
basically that's another one of those things that says this ordinance allows the town to say,
yes
well,
or
if
no?
this doesn't balance it, then
So
we have to be.
if I could, I think of an answer. So in section 8, we have revocation or denial. And it's basically it's a select board decision. But a denial can be based upon previous violations of this ordinance. Based upon it, not like may, it's not shall, it's a may. And then again, may revoke the permit if the owner is issued a ticket or has a fine issued by the distributor, like basically by this. A hearing with select board, like, so there's a process. So if there's a particular house that we start having a real issue with, that the police are going to, we get complaints about it, then that can be a basis for a revocation or denial. But I don't think there ever was an intention to allow a neighbor to say, you can't have it, and us to like, okay, yeah, you're right. That there is a process to either deny it or revoke it. So there's a process for that.
Part of that is based on occupancy limit, because without this, you don't have an occupancy limit.
Right.
So
Yeah.
the occupancy limit, I think, is sort of what's regulating peace and quiet to some degree. You can still put a lot of people in a house. They could be loud, but it's going to be more of a reasonable limit than what you might be able to cram in 4 walls.
So it's gonna be proximity.
Well, there's,
To use the house in Abbey Lane as an example, they could have a party that most wouldn't hear because it's just the size of the facility.
there's one other thing. Because we don't have zoning in Rutland Town, we don't have permits or areas for commercial use versus residential use. And conversion of a property to short-term rentals exclusively would really tip it over to commercial, and it could be smack in the middle of a residential neighborhood. If we had zoning, we could do something about that,
But we don't.
but we
Right.
don't.
So,
So-
should we scratch that?
Well, what this
well-
would do though, this says that if you have the right to do this, to take your property and change it,
Mhm.
but under this purpose, if that property adversely affects the neighborhood and there are complaints and there's problems, then the town basically reserves the right to do something about that and basically deny you that ability to do it in that neighborhood.
It's kind of like the dog ordinance. We
Yeah, we
have a
have.
dog. If you have a dog, you need to get a license. If you have an issue, come to the board. And we had the issue the night, and
I know.
the board didn't say you have to get rid of your dogs. He said,
Yeah.
here's your resolution. And, so it's, there was never an intention to deny anybody the ability to do anything, but it says, if you want to do it, here are the rules that everybody plays by.
And-
Okay,
and-
so back to Kurt. This is his,
The thing is, I mean, we just all said that that's not the purpose of this ordinance. So should we have that in the purpose line is what I'm getting at.
I don't think
we-
we all said it wasn't.
Everybody just said, well, we're not trying to say you can't have it, but yes, there's, if
We're
you,
not limiting the number. That number 4 kind of says that we're balancing the number. So that's that. I didn't like that. This doesn't say we're balancing. It just says that if you're gonna do it, this is what we expect of you. And if you don't,
it seems very heavy handed for a town
Yeah.
with no zoning that can't tell people what they're gonna do anyway.
right. And it may or
We know
may
how
not.
to solve that.
Not zoning. Nice try.
I know.
But
It's the same thing with number 6 that goes right along the same lines of you're trying to preserve character of a neighborhood, but how are you doing that?
Yeah, I,
Right.
How are you preserving it?
number 6, I wouldn't say the guest shall not have an adverse impact. It makes it sound like he gets, it's a people thing. It should be more like the use as a short-term rental should not have an adverse
Yeah,
impact.
so that's a little bit of wording change.
Yeah,
Right. Not specifically that it's
but then that ties back up to number 2.
Right.
And that's what we're talking
It
about. Don't
ties-
stick it in a neighborhood if it doesn't fit. Or make it,
But then it
fit
ties
the
into
size.
who's being the judge of that, or the select board's gonna be the judge of
Yeah.
that. So then we're saying that you can't have
Well,
something in
we're
a neighborhood
the-
with a town with no zoning.
we're also the
You see where I'm going with
Right.
this is you're
We're-
not,
we're the judge of you have a dog and we're gonna say whether that dog is a nuisance or not. So the board does get a lot of authority
Yes, in
for,
various
for
places.
making some judgments and making some decisions that are not always popular.
That's why
So
I'm
we
trying to
haven't-
limit my authority.
We haven't totally satisfied Kurt, but we can go on number 2. What else have you got on the first page, Kurt?
Let's see. Well, the number 3 just kind of seems to preserve and protect residential neighborhood character and livability. You're right back to
The 3 of those all
the
address. the
3
same
of
thing.
those are all the same thing, essentially.
Yeah.
So I guess that's kind of where I'm at, is what ground do we have to tell people that they can't have an Airbnb in their neighborhood?
We're
And
back
that-
to, we're not telling them that. We're telling them if they have one, it has to fit,
But at some point in time, we would have to tell them.
possibly,
Rules
If
in
it
the
didn't fit.
ordinance that say,
what they have to do.
just all this means is this is why we're adopting these rules. You have to look to the rest of the ordinance for the rules. They have to comply with those rules in order to meet these purposes.
But we
It's not
keep
like,
saying that ordinance is for health and safety of the people.
What, and it's all these other purposes. That's why, that was my point, is health and safety may be number 1, but all these other things are also stated purposes.
Yeah.
So you might not like the purposes.
Yeah, but we kept getting told at the select board meeting, it's for the health and safety of the people. It's for the health and safety of the people. And while now it's not, maybe it's for the character of our neighborhoods.
Mhm.
And now we're stepping into grounds that we don't really need to be stepping in, is what I'm getting at.
Okay. Gotcha.
So
Um,
I guess
before we,
that's where I'm at.
okay, fair enough. You've been, I will say you've been very consistent, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
So do we
Number
get rid of that or?
Well,
do we
that's, I
reword
would
it?
say no, but I would take a look at 2 and 3 and 6 because they all do kind of say the same thing and wonder if we can consolidate somewhat. Mm-hmm.
Can I just make a suggestion?
Yeah,
Delete 2 through 6. Just keep number 1.
Yeah, or number 1 and 5.
Number 1 is promote health, safety, and welfare of the town, its residents and visitors.
Yeah, and it seems like everything else is lumped in underneath that.
Number 4 is impossible to
well, I was gonna go after number 4 and change it from limit to
Monitor.
monitor.
I don't think that from my experience with the people that I talk to, it's just not possible to do that.
If people are reporting annually what they're doing, that's monitoring. We've got the
Oh,
numbers.
okay. Pardon
Yeah,
me, yes.
that's kind of what I was looking for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess then it comes back to what are we monitoring it for? We're monitoring so we can limit them at some
Well,
point
if we
in time?
find out that
We see that-
50% of our residential formerly rented homes for families have been converted to short-term rentals, then we've got a housing problem and we need
We
to
might look
address
for a
it.
solution.
But we're not, to
We're not gonna tell
Joe's
you you can't have
point,
one.
to Joe's.
Or in here should
we're
just say,
not
You get
saying-
told- Well, if it
that
gets to the
it's
point where there's too
number.
many of them, we're gonna
still
tell
not
you
gonna
can't
tell
have
them you
them.
can't. Because I wouldn't vote for that. But if you're keeping an eye on things, that's a proactive community looking at the potential problem of and we already have it. I mean, we're actually behind the 8 ball.
So
just
The
wanna
problem
make-
already
or
exists.
I want
stays
to make sure
in.
these are buttoned up because
Mhm.
yes, we as a board have intentions, but as the board changes, if you give too much in these ordinances, obviously they can change ordinances at any time, but if they're going off a guide of an ordinance and we give them too much, in 10 years, they could say, well, it says in the ordinance we can limit them, we'll limit them.
And I don't want,
Which
and nowhere
obviously
here does it say that. It just,
No.
Obviously
it
we
doesn't.
don't want that, but
yeah.
So eliminate everything after 1. Combine 2, 3, and 6. So, because they all kind of relate to the same thing. Eliminate 2, 3, and 6 and change 4 to monitor. Oh, I'm glad we've got consensus on that one.
I think that some of this, well, will be part of it.
Madam Chair,
Yeah,
if I
Dana.
may offer a slightly different interpretation on the safety thing.
Mhm.
We talk about noise pollution, we talk about light pollution. Those are considered to be health and safety threats.
Could you speak
That's
up?
what,
oh, he needs a microphone.
Thank you.
We talk about noise pollution, we talk about light pollution. they are considered to be health and safety threats. I don't think that this is necessarily too far from that in terms of what the ordinance is looking at. It's looking at maintaining a certain level of civility that is conducive to the well-being of the residents of that community. We discussed this at the Planning Commission, though not in those exact terms. But hearing what people are saying, I'm trying to synthesize these to be able to put them into a package that everyone can live with. Because whether it's trash that's being left out, and I know that the folks at Airbnb said that that doesn't happen. Anything can happen as a result of a mistake, and they don't want to get a negative rating. But you can't ensure that. And as Bill has said, Section 8 does talk about the enforcement arm that we have at the local level to be able to make sure that it's all in the best interest of everyone who shares the town. So it's not telling people what to do,
Let's
but it
try
provides.
and get to section 8 eventually. So, but we're still on page 1. And Matt, are you finished with page 1?
Well, I have I guess
Should resolve page 1.
I have
Did you
a question on this,
Okay.
on these options for consolidation.
Okay.
To Andy's point, if we're gonna say the sole issue is health and safety, this comes back to right where we started, which is, does that mean that we should just have a rental registration ordinance for all rentals? Or are we saying that we're concerned that there's a health and safety issues specific to short term that doesn't exist with long term because of the transient nature of the people or what have you?
Actually, maybe that's the idea. Maybe we're going about this wrong. Maybe we just should have a rental ordinance, period, and get away from the short term, long term thing and treat everybody the same. Just change the heading.
So then,
So we do have
get
the
that. How
word
do you find them?
welfare. It's not just health and
It's-
safety. Welfare is in there as well.
Right.
And that's a broader concept. So some of the other things fit within the welfare clause.
yeah, I mean, we're going after short term because they're easy to track because there's a company out there that has some computer algorithm that can track them all down.
Right. But it might be to our best interest to just have one ordinance that monitors rentals within the town. And that ordinance would have these characteristics would fit whether short term or long term, pretty much all of them.
Is that what we do?
Well, now we're steering into
What do you all think?
It's just a heading. It's not really, there's not much else to change other than the definition. Or we'd have to take out the short term definition.
Then you get
Well,
And put in a rental.
I think you would have then the longer term, the reference to, some of the state ordinances and so I
Right.
think it would be a little more comprehensive.
And Mary, I think we lose the monitoring aspect
Yeah.
that this could provide of the different kinds of rentals. And the effects on neighborhoods and.
You could
those
could
areas
have
that are
peop-
not commercial.
sorry, in the registration, if we're doing them all, you could have people specify whether it's long term or short term. I suppose then you'd have both. But now we don't have any tracking of long term.
yeah.
And if you're going to do one, you should do the other. Or
Well,
don't
that's
do
what
either.
Well,
I mean,
You got to be fair.
regardless, we have to decide what it is we're trying to accomplish, and I'm
I mean,
still not sure.
I understand the people in the audience that feel like they're under attack because this is focusing on them as short term. Shame on you, pay your fees, do this, do that. And, there's people out there renting their houses all year long, have been for 20 years, and they're just sitting over there.
well, there's more to it
Showing
than
out.
that. The law is different on evictions, and I think Andy
Yeah.
touched on that.
Yep, there
If you have short-term rentals, you don't have to follow the state law on
And that's why
eviction.
everybody's going this
So
way.
there's a whole layer of protection
Right.
for longer-term rentals for the tenants in those positions.
Yes.
And it's tougher on the landlords.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's why everybody's going short term.
Well, not everybody,
And it's not the only
Mostly
reason,
right?
No,
it's
it's
a really
more,
good business model.
it is,
Yeah.
but like
Yeah.
I know people who lost their rental homes to the
Yes.
mortgage
Yeah.
companies
Yeah.
because they couldn't get their tenants out during COVID.
Yes.
And the bank came and took their homes.
Yeah.
So I could see why they wouldn't want to go back to long-term renting.
There were also some, well, I won't get into that. There were some protections built in, so
Yeah.
they weren't total victims there. I will say that. All right. Let me do a quick poll of the select board because we're the ones who have to. I should mention Sharon Russell has been hospitalized. Okay. And she's awaiting surgery. She's not here. She's we check in every couple of days or so. So she's not able to participate. Wish she could. And sends greetings to everyone. But I just wanted to let you know it's not lack of interest on her part. All right. So it sounds like there is a proposition that we go for a rental ordinance, which would include both short-term and long-term rental. Is that the feeling of the select board?
I think if you're gonna look at one, you need to look at both. I'm not sure. I mean, there's obviously other difficulties with that, like how do you find them? And then there's, I think, a discussion that really needs to happen with somebody higher up at Fire Division of Fire Safety on how they're going to work with us with this and whatnot.
Whether they have the capacity to.
Yeah.
So would you support, and I guess, I'm just going to drill down, would you support an ordinance that covers both?
Depending. I mean, it gets back to the fee.
Do we go in that direction?
We got to look at fee structures and things like that too.
Yeah, we do. Yeah. Joe?
I think it's fair if you look at both.
I mean, I'm not opposed to these people getting Fire Division of Fire Safety inspections. That's obviously a very good thing.
Yeah.
And if we can create an ordinance that ties to that, as long as we're working with the Division of Fire Safety and we can get all that working together, I'm not opposed.
Okay. All right. So there's two.
Yeah.
It would be fair, Matt.
I'm leaning in that direction. I want to know what the drawbacks are. Like with the short term, we were going to hire a company to monitor, and then they'd be able to tell us if somebody was out of compliance. But if we go the other way, maybe we can't do that. Maybe then it becomes like the dog licenses where people just don't do it.
Well, yeah, there's that. So in all of the towns that I've looked at for looking at their policies on short-term rentals, and there's quite a few towns about to have not one that I run across that has anything about long-term rentals. It's 0 of them. Of all the towns that have adopted an ordinance, not one had anything about long-term rentals or apartments. So
Combined together.
No,
at all.
When I went through the ordinances, they had no reference to it.
I think the short-term rental thing is because of this change in the last few years.
Yeah.
And it's become in some communities, maybe a problem. I don't think it's a problem in our town. I think the idea of tracking and knowing what's out there, but on the same token, I think might not be a bad idea to know what else is out there for long-term rental and what's going on.
Part of the discussion was talking about balancing long-term and short-term rentals, which does make sense. Right now, as an example, we really actually have no idea how many there are, and short-term rentals primarily occupy single-family homes or single-family residences. That's primarily where they go. So we had people that have come to some of the hearings say they are town residents, but they own other properties in town. So that's a owner that has a second property in town, which is fine, and that there's nothing wrong with that. So we're looking at creating a baseline where we could say down the road, are we eliminating potentially long-term rentals? We have a long-term rental property on Route 4 that also has short-term rental units built into their property. So they have some units that are long-term, some are short-term. It's a mess.
It is.
So,
well, one of the things is
Sherman has had his hand up patiently trying to get in here.
Well, I was concerned about the way some of the conversation went. It sounds like you think that if we have just one ordinance, it has to be confusing. And we could have one ordinance where the first part is short-term and the second part is long-term. And we don't have to lose anything that's here now.
Okay.
On the short-term section, and we can just add with some work, a long-term.
But make it all under one ordinance.
All under one, but
Yeah.
separate. But once
And the
you
other
get
thing
inside
is-
it separate, you know that
There is a way of tracking.
We're both
Because we
yeah.
have the renter's certificate that the landlords issue every year for the tax department. So we could get information from the tax department to find out how many rental units there are in every town.
Well,
Because you've also got an idea of parcel number and the town, the actual town, and not just by address. So if the tax department would share that information with us, we could tell at least the number of units per town, and that's part of the monitoring long-term rentals for that.
I've tried to get some information from the tax department if they have not even acknowledged the request.
Yeah.
So,
it would be,
the other part about the short-term rentals is that I've read a lot of articles around from different parts of the country, and there are, albeit larger communities, but where they've had a explosion of short-term rental interest. So people bought up properties and then the market died.
Yes.
And now there's a mass exodus of there's just nobody in these houses anymore. So because there was no balance, there was no forethought into how to manage it. So now they're left with, and again, some larger cities, but they're left with a significant number of vacant properties, and that creates a whole different issue. So
That's
I don't
like
disagree
the
that
foreclosure.
looking
Let's
at
go
that
back to
long-term-
Joey. Yep.
so there's no way to balance long-term and short-term rentals without knowing how many long-term rentals and how you can't have a balance unless you know both sides of the equation. So
you're back
so
to,
there's
we
no
need
way
something
that this
tracks both.
ordinance could do it. One of its purposes is to keep an eye or try to balance or unless you know what both sides are. We have to know both sides before
So-
we can have a balance. So
I hear that as a yes, we should have.
I think that we should have one ordinance that, to
Long and short.
Sherman's point, one ordinance that
Kurt's
addresses
open
both.
to it. Matt's leaning toward it.
I think that's fair.
Planning commission's cringing because they know they're gonna get this back.
Well, the other,
Do you have an option there?
the other part of it, I guess the other part of
I
this
don't
too is
care.
when you have these short-term ones. I mean, you can't assume just because somebody registered as a short-term that you could conclude from that they're necessarily taking away from what would otherwise be single-family owned or long-term. For example, Kirk's got one that's part of the house, right? And it's both. So you have a family that's living there, and it sometimes uses short or long-term rental. There's one on Hinsel Terrace, right, where the whole house gets rented out.
Yeah.
But family otherwise uses it as a principal residence. And so, that's not necessarily taking away from a house that would otherwise be on the market, but there could be other issues with it, like number of people occupying it. So, I guess I could be persuaded also that the purpose is just to monitor what's going on so we have an idea of what's going on in the market. But I don't think we can sort of overstate the health and safety if we're not also applying the same requirements to long-term
Okay.
renters. And I'm not quite sure how to balance that in this situation, but that's my concern, is that it would be an equity issue for people, where the short-term people say this isn't fair because long-term people don't have to do this.
So do we create an ordinance which is primarily a rental property tracking ordinance? And have two separate sections, one for short-term, one for long-term? Is that what?
I think that would be fair. Then you're not picking on either segment. Also, you can incorporate some of the basically same things in here, which are the life safety, the safety, welfare, and whatever, but nowhere should we be saying that we're going to limit, or we're going to say, well, you're going to come in and you want to have a short-term rental. No, you can't have it, or you can't have a long-term. I don't think that that's the intent. It
No.
was never my idea, the
Yeah.
intent of this ordinance. I thought
Yeah,
it was a more informational tracking ordinance, and the fees are only to help offset the administration of
That's
this,
right.
and not for the town to be
Yes.
looking to make money or to try to chip in or, take our
Well,
share of.
It's also to
some other-
ensure that it doesn't get ignored.
Right.
So the fees or the penalties. have
The
gotta be
penalties are to
enough.
make sure of compliance, and the
Okay.
fees are only for administrative purposes. It's not
Okay,
the town
yeah.
looking to make an income
No.
on somebody else's income.
So we got
As
two hands up.
Substantial statutes, there is a whole subchapter on residential rental agreements, and there is all sorts of stuff in statute.
Oh,
about
I
it.
know.
So I think if anything, we would be saying see this.
So we might very well. So,
So I like the idea, like, I think it's a good idea where we have. And maybe it starts with this, and then it becomes down the road, like, because there's really no model for a long-term rental ordinance. There isn't one out there, so that's gonna be a whole different.
ordinance, but a tracking ordinance of rental properties is kind of what we're talking about, isn't
Right,
it?
so right, and there's no secret, I'm working on this a while, so.
Yeah, I know.
I've kind of got I've been going around with a lot of information, but I think this is almost an easier one to start with because there is more information that we can access with admittedly with the vendor, we help us with that rather quickly and easily, but it helps us to, and
I see you. I
think
see you.
in our town, we have less long-term rental properties in general. As you know, compared to single family homes versus rental properties, we certainly have a lot more.
Okay, let's, we don't know because we haven't counted them yet.
Right.
So Norman and then Dana, and I'm scanning to see if anybody else, and I'm reminding you, we're now an hour into the meeting and we're still on page 1.
Hey, man. We don't get time updates at a select board meeting.
I know.
What's this?
I know. Barbara told me how to run the meeting. Go ahead, Norman.
I would just like to comment that while I understand some of the hesitancy, and I don't mean that negatively, we understood the purpose was basically a safety purpose to protect the people using short-term rentals, and B, the neighborhood, so we don't get overloaded, overwhelmed, cars on the streets that get in the way of the plows and that kind of thing. Bill, I forget the number you gave us, that he thought there was X,
30.
and we hadn't really checked very far.
Right.
And maybe the first thing we want to do before we go any further on this is determine to the best of our ability what the scope of the issue is. So that our assumptions, that some of the assumptions we've proceeded on, like, cars can spill over in the winter months into the streets because people aren't aware of our of plowing and the need to plow. And the fire safety, the issues that Andy and Jerry have referred to are paramount. And that's a responsibility, I think, of the town, of government. And so I think to some extent we're losing the focus of what we understood, the Planning Commission understood, was the direction that we received. And basically this is what we developed after, I don't know how many meetings and how much debate and how much. I'd just like to make one other comment, I'll shut up. We got incredible help from Bill Sweet. And we want the select board, I certainly want the select board, I can't talk for the rest, to know how hard he worked on this and how much of a help it was. Amen.
Okay, thank you. Yes. Dana, you had something. And Mary Beth, is
No,
that a hand
let,
that's
go,
raised?
go with Mary Beth.
Okay.
I can hold my tongue for a little longer. Yes.
So what if we just table part of the ordinance and focus on the tracking piece and make it take effect in a shorter time frame? So like in a couple of months, we start the tracking ordinance, we just keep all of this, see how it goes, with the goal of having it go into effect in July. Right. But then at least we can start tracking in the meantime, and over the next few months, keep all the work that was done, but table it until we have a better handle on both long-term and short-term.
So how do we
rentals.
track long-term and short-term? This was giving us that handle.
Well, so I guess I mean take out the pieces. So
So is there something?
Oh, wait, she's still got the floor.
So when we had the bigger hearing, I mean, I guess then you don't have you're not collecting the fees. We're not following up. It's totally voluntary. So maybe people won't participate. But we can collect information in certain ways with the available information and the people that are voluntarily providing it. And then continue with the fee structure and everything later on.
Okay, all right. Dana.
60 seconds or less. First of all, I think we've been around the table multiple times, and honestly, there's not a single item that I haven't heard tonight that we haven't already discussed. So put that out there. The purpose, as Norman tried to say, was that we were supposed to, our charge was to look at an ordinance and see what it would do for the benefit of the town and bring a recommendation back to the select board. We've done that. We reached a certain consensus on the value of the entirety of the document and how it fit together. And it fills a void that is not filled by the state because the state doesn't have any regulation over short-term rentals. Bill has mentioned that a couple of times. He says that there are very clear statutes about what is supposed to be happening and how things can be reported to the state. What I would say is that there'd be, if we take Joe's idea and we break this into two sections, that would be fine. But you would have one that would govern all of the things that are not required by the state for short-term rentals, and then a citation that that's what they have to follow for long-term rentals.
So, okay, I think I understand that. Thank you. And I think that was under 60 seconds. And I'll interpret
Barbara's
that
surprise.
as the planning commission feels the select board should do something or get off the pot, right? I mean, that's fair.
As the vice chair, having led a number of discussions, I feel that way. I am not going to speak for any of my colleagues, but that's what I would feel.
So, are
So
we just
back
missing
to-
a component is, because there's to Bill's point, there's not a lot of stuff out there about long-term. There's no ordinances. Usually there's no ordinances because something else is already regulated.
Right.
That's right.
That's
So
right.
if they're already being regulated in their own fashion, this is where the need is. So what we would do if we had a rental ordinance, this would be part one, short term. And then part two would be to come later. We would address and look at what's already in place by the state.
And it might just be a series of references to
Right,
state
because
statute.
it'd be impossible, and I said this earlier, it's impossible for us to try to monitor or see any kind of a balance if we don't know what the other side is.
Okay.
And there has to be a way we can find that. So I think what's here, I'm okay with what's here.
Okay.
So that
Do we
gets,
go forward with putting this in place and then with the long-term to follow?
I think that they both need to be there so we don't look like we're picking on any, but maybe we're not, because maybe the other long terms are already being picked on by somebody else that we're missing, because we've never addressed rentals at all. But this is just the new and upcoming thing.
Yeah.
The only, the whole idea of this for me, like I've said, is I don't want to tell anybody you can't do this. I just
Okay.
want to know if you're doing it and that you're doing it safely and you're doing it with a desire to not create a nuisance.
Okay.
But you
And
do
are
have to have
Are you
something.
satisfied that this draft does we want to know what you're doing, but without,
Other than a few that are in there,
okay,
there's a few, when Kurt did point out some of these things, it's repetitive
yeah.
in this 1 through 6. I think that could be trimmed down to maybe a couple of things. Focus on the life safety and make sure, and part of the life safety is creating no nuisance. And that's part of it. It's just like
That's
having
the
an,
welfare part.
and this is the same thing. that might be, we've said the same thing in like 3 paragraphs or
Okay,
3
yeah,
sentences.
I agree, yeah.
That gets back there needs to be a correction made to that because there is no, in terms of state restriction, there's no difference between a long-term and a short-term rental. They are considered commercial buildings and they are required to have a certificate of occupancy, whether they're long-term or short-term. And there's all the other health and safety things that go along with the fire safety inspection. That's the same for long-term and short-term. So if the state's already regulating long-term rentals and they're already regulating short-term rentals, they're just not being notified of them. Well, they're just not getting notified of long-term rentals
It's the
either.
tracking, monitoring.
But they're not being notified of long-term rentals. So then we get back to Matt's point of we're picking on one but not the other, and we're picking on one because it's easier to track.
Kurt, if I may address that, because that was also something that we've discussed with Bill's help, that there is no mechanism for doing that, and the state doesn't have it on their radar screen for covering that. So if we're going to look out for the best interest,
That being long-term.
no, short-term rentals. So that is not on the state's radar screen, and that's why each town, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Bill, but Vermont League of Cities and Towns has made a recommendation that if we're going to look out for the best interest of each individual municipality, it has to be through an ordinance, because when a state is moot on a point of local need or interest, it's up to the local governing body to come up with an ordinance that will help implement that and track or ensure safety.
Kurt and I are still struggling to understand though how this is different from long-term. How is it different? Like, so is it the occupancy limit that we're putting in that's different we feel is necessary, or?
No, the occupancy that's all set by Division of Fire Safety. And a long-term rental, there's long-term rentals that go without inspection all the time. I think one of the few times where they do regulate it is if it's government subsidized type housing, it's required to have a certificate of
There's
occupancy.
2 meters. There's 2 electrical meters that triggers a state.
Yeah.
Because Green Mountain Power won't give you the.
Yeah.
That's the only other thing. If
Interesting.
it's under
Okay.
1 meter, you're right, then it could go on.
It can go on. So we're right back to the same places. The long terms are skating by just like the short terms are, and there's no difference in state law between the two.
Is that true, Bill? I thought we had that
let's
conversation.
look, I think we've come down to something here. It's either we dump this whole thing, and I'm not hearing that should happen.
No, I don't think you
Okay.
can dump it.
Or that we come up with something that includes some component for long-term rentals so we can track and monitor both types of rentals in town. All right. So if we've got that basic agreement, my suggestion would be that we continue with looking at what we have in front of us, do the line by line, and then either ask the planning commission really, really nicely if they will help us come up with the long-term rental component just for tracking and monitoring purposes to add to this and then move forward.
Yeah, and there's no huge rush on this.
Well,
I mean,
we
we
have
haven't
Kurt.
but we haven't seen any issues with Airbnbs. It's as of right now, so it's not like something that we need yesterday. And if this takes a year to get a good draft so we can figure something out, there's no harm in that.
I don't think the planning commission wants to reinvent this. From what I understand, they don't want this one for a long time.
If we're going to add, a long-term part to this, I mean, we don't need to adopt something right away. You guys don't have to, cram and jam every single meeting on this thing.
So something else, Mary,
So
that
we
we
got
can just
Andy.
rebut that, just like
Okay.
that. I think there is a sense of urgency because much of the housing stock here in Rutland Town is 1980 or older.
Yeah.
That means it doesn't even have to have any smoke detectors inside it.
Mhm.
I really think it's
Until you're-
imperative that the select board get an ordinance in place that starts the monitoring now and starts an inspection before we have any more units coming on the market. that
Are you talking about
uninspected.
both long-term and short-term?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I tell you the truth, I have to tell you, I was in an apartment last week and both smoke detectors in the place were sitting on the kitchen counter.
So I have a solution. I have a solution to that.
Okay.
So we have plenty of money as a town. We can hire this company to go find the Airbnbs in our town.
Short-term rentals.
Short-term rentals. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I don't want to annoy them people.
But we can get the list, turn it over to Department of Fire Safety and say, these are the ones. Can you please inspect them?
Right.
There you are.
And we lose any bit of control, any bit of opportunity to monitor, because once we pass it to fire and safety, it's out of our hands.
Well, yeah, but then we can still work on this, but that's how we make
Anybody
sure
want
we're
to
all.
do that? Planning or
That's a-
select board? Because
And I
would be
don't have a
against
problem with that either.
I would like to do.
But I like to see some management, but
I'm
one
not
of the
saying
things I
throw
was
this out,
wondering that
but
we
that's a
could,
way to make sure our people are safe now
Well,
is to
we could
give them the
also
list
do
and,
this.
yeah.
That seems a little more heavy-handed than what we proposed here.
That's already existing law. Which
It's
is kind of-
existing.
it's already existing,
I mean,
and it's not
they are
on us.
required to have it by state law.
right?
Yeah, we're stepping in and doing it as opposed to.
All we're doing is making this
Stepping in
information
and doing it.
available to a state agency that should be doing it.
I mean,
but
we,
what I was-
we report them as firefighters when we go.
You know,
If we went through this
go
with the
to Act
definition-
250 and look at how successful we've been going to Act 250, saying, "Hey, you guys should be doing something about this." We
But
haven't
I
been
wonder
that
if we could
successful.
do a quick thing, Mary, like the definitions, just
Yes.
those things. If everybody is okay with things like definitions, that's a pretty big.
All right, so you're saying let's do
Let's
the
just-
page by page.
Yeah.
Let's do the page by
Like,
page.
Just to give us an idea, if
you.
everybody's okay with that portion and not the
Okay,
purpose portion.
Mary, before we do go on to that, can I just give the context of another ordinance that we've been working on? Just, I can do this in 15 seconds.
we've really, it's been an hour and 15
We
minutes.
cut down the ordinance for
How do you do that?
subdivision.
Oh, right. Okay. All right. Okay, section 3 definitions.
Does anybody have a
let's
complaint
start
like
with-
with bedrooms?
Excuse me.
I have,
Just go,
Let
Mary,
me
just ask
start
ask about the
Section
bedrooms.
3 definitions. Matt had quite a few things that he had scoped out, so I wonder, that's why I'm turning to him.
I have nothing in the section.
Nothing in section 3.
Nope.
Kurt, do you have anything in section 3?
No, they're definitions.
And
do you want-
we all agree on the definition.
They're
But this is-
accurate. Yeah.
May I say something?
Yep.
Oh,
Your chair. Don't you like it better when I'm at home?
yeah, yeah.
Oh, because then there'd be a delay.
Are not defining here. And if we're talking about going further, then we haven't defined what a resident is. We've defined an occupant for the short-term rental part. We haven't defined and do we want to, a resident for the longer-term rental? Just saying.
I don't know.
Well, if we go the longer term rental thing.
where are you, Mary?
That point. That's
A
more.
resident tenant, it could be either.
I don't know.
Sorry, where does
There
this
could
come
be
into
more
play,
than
man?
that.
It's hypothetical.
In terms of definition.
If you did a long-term component, you got to have something in here that defines who a long-term tenant is, okay?
Yeah.
So just pointing that out.
There'd be quite a few definitions probably.
Oh, there would be a ton of them.
Yeah,
And
long-term
state
tenant
law-
would be
But
over
that
30
was
days.
just,
That's right.
as long as we're okay with the definitions, we don't have to rewrite that stuff for
Well,
this ordinance.
I would just suggest that we keep that in mind.
Okay.
Section 4. Matt, what you got?
Okay, so here's where we have our first fee at line 112.
Yep.
And I know this is pretty much, I think the planning commission has said, do whatever you want here. My suggestion would be maybe you go to consider a base fee that's like $100 and then get rid of the per bedroom fee, which would lower it overall for people, but
So if you had a structure in one bedroom, it's $100 this way, and it's $100 if you have a structure.
all we're
And
trying
if
to
you
do
have
is-
5 bedrooms, you're still only paying $100. I think the
Yeah,
fees
or-
were designed to cover the cost of administration.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that would do.
So, and I've made this very clear. The fees were 100% arbitrary. There was no my intent. The vendor's about $3,000. It's $100 roughly per property is what they charge. We have 30 that we know of so far. So we're looking at $3,000 for the first year. The intent was for the fees to cover that cost
And that's it.
and not to be income.
Right.
It was
Right.
so
So
that would
if
be
we,
the-
if we left this in, it would hit the ones that are bigger and took more time to look at. That's kind of what you were thinking.
Right.
So we should leave
More
it.
time.
Right.
Does
And
it
we-
take more time for the guy who's tracking it?
There could, well, there probably isn't a lot more work, depending, like, if, so we have some that have one, we have some that have 6 bedrooms. Most
Right.
of them are 1 and 2 and a few 3 and a couple 4. So most of the fees would be 100 to 100, would be less than $200. Most of them would be less than $200 for
Okay.
a year.
The guy who's looking them up, it doesn't make a difference to him how
No.
many bedrooms they
Does
have.
not.
So why don't we just make it a flat fee, whatever?
So the only reason I put the bedrooms in there is not, I hate saying like make more money because it's not making money, but it's just to make sure we cover the cost. But we have, for example, we have roughly 55 bedrooms here on 30 properties. So we would more than cover the cost of the vendor. So it absolutely could be reduced. And if it's $100 flat fee, that's fine. There was no like malice in the fee structure to punish one person have more bedrooms or not, or discourage people saying like, oh, I'm gonna say I have less, but I really have more. Like that was.
So if you got 30 units you know about and you need $3,000, why not $100 per unit
That's fine.
and
That's fine.
flat fee?
That's fine.
It's fine. Really, there's
So you don't care the bigger ones paying more?
They don't need to, whatever. If we're only doing a tracking one, I mean, I understood that. I thought there's more involved, but if there isn't any more involved, as long as that's a more equitable thing.
Yeah, really,
to
the
somebody.
only expense we're gonna incur is of any consequence is gonna be that vendor.
So we just make it $100 per structure and let it go at that.
All
Base fee is $100 for application.
per dwelling unit?
Yep.
Okay,
Yes.
okay.
And that's fine.
Anything else?
For dwelling,
Fine.
not for rental.
I'd just like to make a point that in the 2 sessions that we had open to the public, fee came up once when at that point it was $100 and 100.
Yeah.
And the comment from one of the management person was, that's insignificant. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
There's so much money flowing through here that the fee is.
Yeah.
Just got nothing to do with their acceptance of this.
This is a annual fee.
Right.
It's an annual fee.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. All right.
I never thought, I don't know if they were
Section
more concerned about us trying to regulate it in which we're
5.
not.
It was the,
And I never saw anything about regulating. So
Yeah.
other than that one item in the
okay.
first section.
Section 5, annual report.
I had one small question on this.
Mhm.
So this is the report form, and elsewhere it talks about a renewal form, and I guess this question to Bill is, would this be one form or is it going to be 2 different forms?
Which
Can
one
it-
you asking about?
section 5 is in a report,
Yes.
and I think somewhere else
Sorry.
there's mention of a renewal form that's required, and I'm wondering, will this just be one form? And if so, maybe we need to clarify the terminology.
I have it's created like a yearly report form, which are very basic. It's just basic information about basically how many days, duration, number of guests, like.
Okay,
and
so what's the difference? But do we need an initial form that's longer, or is one
Section
form
5.
okay?
What's your line number?
One form could, we could,
17.
I think,
That's it.
Just have it.
Comment allowed at all?
And you can see,
Okay.
you can see that we're not getting very far if you can be very quick. Could you identify yourself, please?
Postally, my wife Bridget Remington has been to some.
Right.
And
And you've been in my house, so yes, okay.
Fun fact.
Not to smear him or anything, but
I mean, I've heard things for the first time tonight, so everything makes sense. Safety is really important, et cetera. But the date, duration, and number of guests for each short-term rental period and stay is really cumbersome on the people who are renting. I mean, I don't understand, if you're looking for monitoring of short-term versus long-term, check a box. You know if it's short-term, you know if it's long-term. I don't understand why the onus is on the people renting to get all that information. Actually, I had a question mark by number 3 too. So what's your thinking, Planning Commission? Why is number 3 in there? Where this is line
Can somebody give me
127.
127.
And this is under section 5 and it's the reporting form.
well, it's information on volume of activity, I presume. With
Is
this
that just
purpose.
something off the Killington template?
not just Kelly. There was several that.
Yeah.
that did.
Okay, planning commission?
That was recommended by the town council, is my understanding.
Okay,
I don't know that I really care.
The only thought maybe is to track sales tax, but
Or-
that's a lot of
And we'd have to notify
administrative.
them. Yeah.
That's a lot of administrative work.
I mean,
that
I
we can't
could,
keep
I
track
can
of.
live without number 3.
That would be interesting to know the data, but I guess I agree with Kirk. That's, if anything's a burden on people, that would be it. Cause you know, if you got people every weekend, you got to keep track, whatever. Is that,
And to what end?
I think we concur on that, Mary.
okay, take it out?
Well, the only thing that we discussed was that's the difference between when it crosses over to 30 days or accumulation. I
Oh.
think that's why the town attorney recommended it, because it triggers a number when you go over. Is it 30 days consecutive or 28 days? It's something like that. There's some
Short to long term.
that
Yeah.
right. That is the difference. If we're trying to figure out what's a long-term and a short-term rental, then that is what triggers it. So if somebody does rent it out for their thing for 36 days or whatever, they're no longer a short-term rental. By definition, by statute, they are now a long-term rental. So I that's the only thing that I can remember. But that was, I think, Kevin's recommendation.
That's listed in the definitions, so I'm not sure we need this
Okay,
Yeah, because
metric in there.
it would help
in
you.
order to, you'd need like guest name or something too if you're going to keep track of it for 28 days.
No,
You don't need to report that. You just need to report that it's guest A or B, or it can be completely anonymous. But once you have
Yeah.
some index to that guest, you know how many days.
Yeah, which just
guess
adds
that
a whole
kind of
nother metric to the.
Kind of overgoes the monitoring thing. I mean, we're just trying to see what's number that's out there now. How many people are there and how long they've been staying, because if they get into the long-term portion of this, then some other stuff may kick in. And which, so I can do without 3.
all right.
And in theory, it helps you know how much tax you're supposed to get, but then you'd have to also ask them how much your check.
Yeah,
Yeah,
then
no,
you got to
To
do the
answer your
math.
question,
And,
the,
somebody else.
I forgot, I didn't make copies for everybody, I'm sorry. This is what I came up with for like the registration form for whether it's, and I have first thing is new or renewal. So it's the same form if you're new or you're renewing. If you're renewing, you can just follow the same stuff. It's just making sure it's over, but it is one.
Form. Okay, thank you. All right, anything else?
Sorry, it's new or renewing is one
Yeah,
form, but
it's-
the information reporting is a separate form.
Correct.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay. Anything else on section 5 annual report? 3 is coming out. Yes, Matt?
Let's see. Okay, I just had a note about the fire thing, but I understand that better now. So good on that.
Okay, Kurt, anything?
so
Joe, anything?
Nope.
Okay, number 6, section 6, regulatory requirements and prohibited activities. Matt,
Yes, let's see. Okay, again, I guess it was, I had this question on starting of section 10, line 198, which is the fire thing.
Okay.
And my question was, does this also apply to long-term rentals? And I think how I understand that the answer is the Division of Fire Safety governs them the same and may be ignored equally.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah, pretty much.
Accurate, very accurate. Yep.
Touche.
all right. So that's at the very end of section 6. Is there anything in the previous parts of section 6? Okay. Section 7, enforcement penalties and other relief. Matt,
So, I think in general, my sense is these fees feel high to me, especially I think
Scare tactic.
we need to, okay, but I think we need to also
Didn't
allow
you just
for,
agree to set it at 100 and move on?
that's the
That was
previous,
the-
that's the,
That's the registration.
Annual
This is a penalty
Oh,
for,
penalty, okay.
for
Don't
not
do
following section
Yeah, yep, okay.
32 or what.
Sorry.
But you are.
It's a scare tactic. In the history of this town, rarely. We've had a few things that Bill could, as administrator for some different sewer water things. The town rarely does this.
We have.
We rarely go
a
after
waiver provision that allows
provision
us
that
to reduce the fee.
reduce the, yes.
Yeah,
I may comment on it.
And
There
you
is
took it
no
out.
Provision in here.
I know.
That is at Kevin's urging.
I know.
Because he says, don't, it's more problematic, so. And Matt, I know we've kind of talked about it a little bit, the penalties are actually in line with other ordinances, so it's
Right.
consistent.
Okay.
I like, yeah, it does seem like a lot, but it's, as Joe said, it's a stick to not do it.
Well, if it's in, I mean, I can take that as an explanation or accept that, I guess. And there is a allowance in here for a first time waiver. And I think it's important to allow for some learning curve here because
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely. We're, again, you're not out to,
Whenever we've had an ordinance that's come down to a penalty, I have tried very hard to work with whomever it is
Yeah.
to be like, let's get this fixed, because I have no interest in fining anybody. Because it just means the problem exists, and it could mean the problem still exists. We'd rather fix the problem than the fine. It's the reluctance to fix it with encouragement that becomes. the problem.
So listen to what Matt just pointed out. Number 3 is a written warning, which doesn't rise to the level of getting hit with a fine. But if then they continue
Right.
Exactly.
the bad behavior, then we hit the fines.
Document
Okay,
like that way.
and,
All right.
and that's
that kind of
pretty
is the way
common
to say it. Yeah.
in law in a lot of regulatory things. Usually everybody gets the warning.
Now, how would you
So
know?
there is
I never done that.
there is one thing with all the ordinances that I like to try to clarify, and it's $800 per day.
Yes.
Yeah.
Should we change that $800 per working day? Because
Uh-huh.
I don't think we should be fining somebody on a Saturday when they can't come in and clear their stuff
Well,
up.
that's because they've got people in the house generating income on Saturdays and Sundays especially. So
So I've always thought that was kind of odd that we didn't specify that, because you're finding people for weekends when they can't come in and hand in there.
I guess I've never seen it worded the way
Well,
you would propose.
it would be useful perhaps to at least reiterate under part 2 here, particularly subparagraph B, that these are each per day, because it does say that up above where it's,
Okay.
part 1 says up to $800 per day. But it could be clarified that each of these are per day for these
Working day.
or a working day.
No.
But you
And
know,
I
it's
would-
funny though,
I
they
would
say that, but
disagree.
most of their working days are Friday,
Well,
Saturday and Sunday.
Yeah, if you get into that.
All right.
I think the general consensus on working days, Monday through Friday.
You guys will never get to a consensus.
It's hard, and it's hard. Again, there's not many issues that we're gonna be like, hey, this is like, we're gonna keep going after them. I
Yeah.
think if we said in an instance, there's a problem and we close at 2:00 on Friday. If they had it fixed at 4:00 on Friday, they had electrical something. And they say, and they have a sign that their thing's done. It was done at 4:00 on Friday afternoon. They bring it to me Monday. I'm like, yeah, you're good. Like, I'm
That's the
not-
number
I'm
3,
not
maybe.
interested
Yeah.
in handing out violations. I'm really not. So it's because that's the last resort.
Well, no,
I just-
actually, the last resort is section 8, which is revocation of the
Exactly.
permit.
Right.
So if they really don't, that's our ultimate. We can yank the permit.
Right. I mean, if you have a short-term rental and they are consistently having problems with neighbors, with noise, with whatever, and they come back to renew it, this gives the town the right to say, no, you
Okay.
can't do it because you're not complying with the other 10 pages.
So as long as we're on the last page, section 8, 9, and 10,
Get what you want, but I think.
what do you got, Matt?
Yeah.
Oh, so did you have something?
On the next ordinance.
Did we
I
want
brought
to
it up on
clarify
previous.
again?
Working days.
Oh,
On
under
10.
2B, all other violations,
Definition of
it should be
working days.
400 per day.
Per day.
Yeah. after
600
each
per
of the-
day, 800 per
Right.
day.
Right.
Oh,
Okay.
you're really
Did you
confused.
get that, Bill?
No.
Okay.
I couldn't-
Section 7.
Yep.
2B, all other violations, first offense should have per day after it. Second offense, 600 per day.
Including the fourth and subsequent offenses.
Yes,
Which seems
per
like
day.
it's a little embedded there.
224 through 226 add per day.
Go to 227, Bill, because 227 has the 800 embedded in
Yeah.
that paragraph, and otherwise you'll miss it.
Okay. Okay. So,
Well,
Matt, what do you got?
Well, now I'm looking at that 227 again. So what's the automatic revocation for 12 months? So if you were imposing a fine under that, does that mean you're going to go back and count the 800 days until it was discovered or something for a day? And then, because the revocation just says it's automatic. So
I've asked that question
I would
before
be-
with
I
other
would be
ordinances.
Surprised if we got to that point,
okay, well,
but it would, you're asking to be retroactive? Is that what you mean?
I'm just wondering how you read this because, the third offense is $800 per day.
Correct.
So fourth offense is $800 plus automatic revocation. Well, when is if it's automatic, you collect the $800 and you're done,
yeah,
right? So,
right.
So maybe you don't put the per day in there, or is there some?
I see what you're saying. If we've pulled their registration, there's no more per day.
Yeah, you use the 800 and
Well,
you're
it's 800 per day up to the date of revocation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wait,
Oh.
yeah,
oh, oh.
but then when are you revocating? You go ride that out for 2 months to gather more.
Well, they could,
It's gonna
they
take a
could
while to get to the hearing.
voluntarily surrender their permit. They could, and that would stop the clock.
Does that need to be in line?
That a working day or weekend?
Yeah, yeah.
I've always gotten into this stuff with these ordinances because I feel like these need to be kind of airtight, and sometimes there's really
Boy.
some
I
weird
understand.
discrepancies in this. Like the building permits the same way. Like,
You know,
per day from when you built the garage or per day from when we found it, and there's
Welcome to our world.
that's
So
right.
if
I've
you,
never found.
Which is the flip side is welcome to the lawyer's world because we like to find these things. Norman.
one of the wordings in this,
May it please the court.
Yes.
probably will.
I think that you should consider the fact that you may revoke, but people may still continue.
Yes.
And so I would not suspend that $800 per day because it may
Okay.
continue, and this would be a deterrent to continue. They may say, revoke it, I'm going to challenge it, and until the court throws me out, and then you got how long?
Okay. Because we've revoked the permit and we've stopped the fine from accumulating, but we didn't really want to do that because they're just
No,
on their
no,
nose.
'cause then they
Okay.
gotta-
and we're actually
So-
discussing that
Then they have
because it
a
says
free
fourth
ride.
and subsequent offenses. If you take it says fourth offense,
Yeah.
$800 plus automatic
Per day.
revocation. But we're put in subsequent offenses, which means we're anticipating they may keep offending even though we've revoked their.
Okay. So we just leave it at 800 per day and we don't cut it off.
I'd take
Okay.
out subsequent.
Okay.
Well, I think what,
I think-
Which never went in, but that's okay.
I think what Joe is saying is, and this is the same thing that Bill was talking about, and it goes to Matt's question. The offense is that it gets addressed each time. So if on the first of the month, you have your first offense, on the 15th of the month, you have your second offense because it hasn't been addressed. On the 30th of the month, you have your third offense, and on the 15th of the next month, you have your fourth offense, and that means they haven't done it. So the clock goes back until the date at which they were notified of the previous offense. I think that makes
Okay.
perfect sense from a practicality standpoint.
So we're
Barbara.
keeping in per day
Yes.
in the fourth and subsequent offense.
Yes. But we're not doing the language that I suggested because my former landlord didn't like it. Just saying. Okay.
All right. We never agree.
Not much, no. Section 8, Matt?
Yeah. So, so the first sentence here says we may revoke. And then it says, and we can revoke if a ticket, if a property is issued a ticket or has a fine issued by the Judicial Bureau. Okay. And then it goes on to say a hearing will be held. I think it might be worth adding clarification here that a revocation hearing, like if we decide to revoke, we'll hold a hearing. We're not holding a hearing on every ticket, in case there's any ambiguity there. And so like people,
Add revocation.
yeah, and I assume, well, maybe I'm wrong about this. If we ticket somebody, can they request a hearing to contest? Do we need something in here on that? Or
Kevin reviewed this, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
He was okay with this process, so And he's the one ultimately that would get this dumped on him, so.
So,
Yeah, we're the ones that have to have the hearing.
Well, there's that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so to my point, like these hearings would only be occurring if we're trying to decide on whether to revoke a permit.
Yeah.
Right.
And that, well, and it's being that's under the section title is revocation or denial of permit, like, I line the word is zero issue, like, that's easy to do, but I would hope that they wouldn't think that would be it, but certainly adding the word to clarify it makes it easy to eliminate any problems.
okay, so
You guys
does
got the
the
law degree. Don't look at me.
does the property owner have to request the hearing? No, I don't know, I'm
This would be if we're
confused.
trying to revoke, we would be
Okay.
the ones calling a hearing.
Okay, all right,
Or would we just revoke it and the revokee wants to
Contest.
have a hearing
Yeah.
as to why? Wouldn't it be that way?
Well, right now, what it says is we may revoke and a hearing will be held.
Yeah.
Which I think is appropriate.
That's due process.
yes,
So the hearing is just due process for the action that you're planning to take.
Okay.
So in order for the other person to raise the question and
Why they're being revoked?
Mhm.
right, so that they can defend themselves,
Okay.
because you're taking away a property right, I think. I'm not a lawyer, but that's what I've learned in lots
So
of
do
school.
we add the word revocation in front of the word hearing?
I think that makes sense because
Okay.
that's what Matt was saying. Clarifies the type of hearing, because you're not just having a general hearing.
That's fair.
It's a
The
due
rest
process.
is fairly consistent with other
It's
ordinance.
a pretty small item, but there's a bunch of lawyers in this town that are a real pain in the butt.
Yeah,
Excuse me, Mary.
Really?
It's just awful.
Excuse me, Mary.
yeah, Norm.
I think the language in the beginning of paragraph number 1, starting at line 240, needs to be tweaked. I'm uncomfortable with, in the second line, has been issued a ticket or I think it should, a fine has been fined by the Judicial Bureau.
About a fine imposed.
Or has whatever.
Yeah.
But the way it is doesn't make sense.
Okay,
And I'm not familiar with the ticket process. Who issues the ticket?
yeah, I'm not either. Again, this may be more of a Kevin question than anyone else. Kevin Brown.
I'm not sure where this came from. Did it come from Kevin?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
most of it,
He's
yeah.
Yeah, he
Twice.
wanted a,
Huh?
okay,
We've reviewed this twice.
all right.
I'm not sure any of us are aware of how that ticket process goes. So this whole thing needs to be just clarified.
So what if
Let's
they,
get an explanation from
yeah, because
Kevin.
what if they have a ticket issued to them, but they can contest the issue?
So
they can
they've got dual
contest it in
tracks
court,
going up. Yeah,
innocent until proven guilty.
okay.
We're not
Supposedly.
changing anything. We're gonna consult with. Ken.
We're gonna ask Kevin. Other than putting the word revocation in front of hearing on line 242. Okay, ask Kevin. All right, anything
Mary,
else?
I had it I didn't want to get into the really fine print, but there's a number of language things that I found ambiguous or puzzling that don't change substance. And I would like
Terrible.
to, excuse me?
I said, see, lawyers, they're terrible.
If you
Even when they're
haven't-
retired, they don't.
It's had a very good example tonight.
I try it.
Anyway, I would like permission when, I guess we're gonna have to go over
Right.
some of this to fine tune those things. I don't think they affect substance, but I think they affect,
Well, you folks voted to send it to us.
and I confess that I fell down because that's generally been either my role or Dana's.
Don't bring me into this, Norm.
And,
You're doing well on your own.
Frankly, I think we may have picked up a few of these tonight, but I'd prefer not to do another
But they're really,
tweak thing.
I'll talk to you.
Talk to me, Norm.
Okay.
All right.
And me, Norm.
Yes, really. Okay, section 9, severability, that's the usual, I think.
Yeah, that's.
Section 10, adoption and effective date, and
good.
the proposal is July of next year.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
I think the TH after the first blank on the effective date should be removed, because if it's the first, second, third,
Oh,
it
stop.
will not work.
I didn't catch that.
He's just trolling us.
Well, you could say on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I got
It, we'll fill that in properly.
Day.
Yeah.
Business day.
Yeah. Yeah.
We'll
Okay.
get right on it.
All right, Matt, what have you got?
All right, so you have a general topic now about applicability or administration, I guess. So I get a call from Marie Pennington, and she raised an issue that I think is important for us to consider. I'm not sure if it's possible to do this, but her comment was she didn't think that if we adopt the ordinance that we should issue permits to properties that are in neighborhoods that have restrictive covenants that would permit that would prohibit the activity.
this did come up at a planning commission.
Okay, so Mike, a comment and a question. Number one, I mean, it makes sense that we wouldn't do that if we could avoid it. But I guess I wonder, is it feasible? Do we track any of these covenants, and
No.
would we have to interpret them even if we did, right? So
Yeah. And you're.
There's also, I think, a fairly recent Supreme Court ruling on discouraging covenants. What is it? There was, and I don't remember, or was it a state law that was changed? It was one or the other. But I absolutely do not want to be in the business of trying to acknowledge, codify, and enforce private covenants. Just don't want to do it. Just don't.
We just assume as a planning commission that they were off limits to this.
That's how you folks dealt with it. Okay. All right.
They'd have to resolve it
Discussion
themselves.
About their water and sewer systems, and we're like, we don't have any jurisdiction over that. We don't, so as measured, we don't research, enforce, investigate covenants.
Mhm.
So it would be purely approval or denial based upon the merits of the ordinance itself.
Yeah.
The permits will be public record. So any neighborhood
Right.
association will be free to see if one's been
Right.
issued in the neighborhood, but beyond that, we wouldn't really get involved in it.
Yeah. Then they could proceed with a private action
Right.
on the covenant if they wish to do so. But
That's out of our jurisdiction.
yeah,
And any
Oh, yeah.
properties that would be served by water and sewer through the city that were one of these, if there's an increase, there's a mechanism already that we can change that. So we're covered there. So we don't have to, if somebody had municipal sewer, say like on any property, there's already something there. If that usage goes way up, then,
Yeah.
we track those things already. So that's covered.
okay, so we've gotten through this.
Yep.
My suggestion would be, because we've done some, we should combine this and we're taking that out, that we see a clean draft. And then,
14 people look at me.
well, I guess,
It won't be till next week.
no, and, well,
it's not a hurry.
Again.
yeah,
And anything that you're doing like this, I don't think we should be in a hurry.
no,
I don't like being under,
That is
I think that we should try to do to the best of our ability, a fair and equal thing. So the one thing that I don't know if we came to a conclusion was that purpose section. Have we nailed that down to what we want that to be? And what
Okay.
we want that to actually say?
all right, do we all agree that we keep number one? This is line 16.
Yeah.
Okay.
This one here, we spent the first hour and a half on.
Do we agree that we keep number 4, but change it to monitor conversion of long-term rentals? Some language that talks about monitoring rather than limiting.
Well, if we don't know how many long-term rentals we have, then how are you gonna monitor how many short-terms you have? Yeah, or how many are converting?
Well, that's the other piece of the long-term ordinance, but do we want something in here to start talking about conversions?
Or do we want something in there that says
We
that
do.
we're tracking? The purpose of the ordinance is to track short-term rentals. Period.
In my eyes, a line like that would drive people away from applying for a permit. Because they're gonna see that as the town's tracking them. And they don't necessarily want the town tracking them in their data.
Right.
All
But
right.
then they're going to be hit with a fine if they don't apply for a permit. So
Especially if
they've
it-
got to get over the sensibility of not wanting to be
So,
monitored.
so we
and
got to
go
come up
to-
with some language that
So
addresses what we want to do, which is try to know what's going on out there, but don't hurt anybody's feelings doing it.
I may be coming around to Mr. McCain's view that number one, maybe all we need is welfare is a really broad term. Maybe we just leave it at that. We all have different reasons for why we might want it if we vote for it.
Because if you leave it with just the purpose clause, it says nothing else about keeping an eye on, are we losing housing stock for families?
So it's the welfare,
Welfare
of the
of the
town.
town.
Welfare of the town would cover that.
I would like, well, you know,
Wanted a little more defined.
I wanted to tell people what this is about. I
Right.
mean, we were talking about transparency, so, you know, let's tell them that we're keeping an eye on this and we're
What
concerned.
about like monitoring the balance between short-term rentals, long-term rentals and other property?
And, you know, owned, yeah,
Family homes, like.
and something like that,
So it
No.
doesn't look like we're picking on anybody,
right?
but we
Well,
want to
we
know
are.
what's going
Well,
on.
we
Huh?
want to know
Unless
what's going
unless we
on.
broaden the ordinance, we're picking on
Well,
short-term rental.
that's,
Yeah.
Well,
that's,
no, I think that eventually there will be a rental ordinance that will cover both, but, or
I think
let's get through this one.
so,
maybe Mary can propose some language for us that would sharpen the focus on what it is exactly we're saying we're monitoring this for. And that would be fine.
I thought I remembered way early on, you were the one who raised the concern about losing long-term rentals.
Yeah, it's.
And
it is
there's
the
nothing
concern
we can
of
do
mine,
about
I
it.
just don't-
Maybe you and I can take.
And
a
that's
look
why,
at
to
this.
me, again, it's a
There's nothing.
it's a
we can do to
horizontal
control
equity
that.
issue.
And nor do I want.
We're
to.
treating, we shouldn't let short-term rentals be easier than long-term rentals in a way that encourages people to move from long-term rental.
It already
short-term.
is. It
But they're
already
doing
is.
well. There's the eviction issue,
Yes.
which
Yeah.
we can't do anything about, and that's a real
Right.
problem.
Yeah.
And that's an incentive. But we shouldn't, if the issue is short-term people don't have to comply with health and safety regulations that long-term people have to comply with, that's a problem. But I think what we've all learned tonight is that they're all subject to the same regulations.
It's just the state ignores them all.
And
Well, there's the market factor too, which is pretty big. Right now.
But
There's
there's
a real-
nothing as a town select board that we can do to control the markets
No,
of the area.
No. Okay, so I will take number 4. You want some language, right? And I need to justify why I want to keep it in. And then
I
2,
like the idea of knowing what's going on,
3.
but I don't know how to word it so
Okay.
that it's not offensive.
Okay.
Without,
I'm
you
not
know,
you could just put in. like,
Monitor, I thought was fairly simple.
yeah.
Okay, so
Let's see
2,
what's up.
3, 5, and 6 kind of all sound the same, so we wanted to come up with one that would cover those. Was that correct?
Yeah.
Okay,
Honestly, Mary, I disagree with 5. I think 2, 3, and 6 do. I think
Okay.
5 is closer to 1, and there is
Yeah.
an extension on 5 that is not, 1 promotes,
Mhm.
5 ensures. There's a regulatory component, I think, that's in the word ensure that is not present in promoting.
all right.
So I think promoting is educating people about it, and that the ensuring means that we have a compliance component.
So we're looking
So
to
we take-
combine 2, 3, and 6.
So if you do 1 and 5, Mary, so you put down there that the purpose of this ordinance is to promote and ensure
There you go.
the public safety and welfare of the town and its residents.
There it is.
And it's all in one.
All
And you-
right.
And you like that? Or-
I still like the inclusion of neighborhoods, communities somewhere in the purpose.
There's no way we can do that.
Sure, you can have a separate section, 5.
Yeah, but no, there's no way that we can ensure the well-being of a neighborhood. Like we're a town of no zoning. We can't tell people that.
That's
This
true.
is, we're monitoring, we're making sure things don't go too far, so we sort of do, it's under the general welfare.
What's the too far? We're not saying you can't have them.
It's the occupancy limit. Again, that's
Huh?
where it's all contained in the occupancy limit. That's the only real
And we're not gonna do.
limitation. that
Which
there
goes
is
back to the
contained.
safety.
Okay,
Right.
let's not reopen this whole debate, folks, okay? I think we have a handle on
I like
the
this debate.
purposes
Love
section.
debate.
If something good comes from debate, it's always good.
Okay,
If we, if
well,
we just
stop
beat
by the
something.
grill on Saturday morning and we can talk.
That's gonna be a.
That's
be
fine.
fun. Thing,
I gotta drive the tractor.
So, well, I guess you won't be able to debate then.
I see. All right, now I see why I'm stuck in the tractor cab.
So here's the question I have. Do we attempt to tweak this language ourselves, or do we ask the planning commission to do it? Okay.
I think it's.
That's
Well,
the
since
answer.
we'd got the
We're-
issue with it, I think it's us.
It's
Yeah.
It's on,
Thank
it's
you,
on us.
Thank
It's
you
on
very
us.
much. We
Okay.
appreciate you. John.
Everything
very
else here has been
expressive
really
people.
good, but this, the
gonna
whole
skip the
purpose of
middleman,
this
too.
is what's is stymied the whole purpose. It's what are we trying to do?
Mhm.
And if we can, and like I say, you're trying to do something and be as least offensive
Okay.
and invasive into people's business as we can be, but still want to know what's going on.
We could throw it at Bill just as easily as you can. So
So, so
And-
we're
and-
gonna look for a clean copy of the short-term rental portion.
Yep.
And now, can we look back to the planning commission and say, would you help us with a long-term rental?
Or if,
piece?
and actually part of that, Mary, would be is a long-term rental ordinance necessary because there's
Right.
already stuff out there.
Right. Even if it's just a, one
Compilation.
page saying long-term rentals are governed by, blah, blah, blah.
You know, and, but it would be nice to know what's in town, just like it's
It
be
would.
nice to know this.
Would we
Yes.
still want a certificate of occupancy on file like we're going to require from the short-term rentals?
like,
Did that say that in there somewhere that we're asking for a certificate of occupancy? Did I miss that?
That's in order to get the inspection report.
If it's a long-term rental, they should already have it, so they're
Right.
just making a photocopy of what they already have and giving it to us.
Yeah, but if it's a short-term rental, they should already.
I like the, but I do like the idea
Oh,
of us
yeah. No, I think we should require.
finding out if the people that have long-term rentals are actually abiding by the rules.
Mhm.
We're making these people abide by the rules. Let's make everybody abide by the rules.
Okay.
Cause if you rent a house by the month all year long and it's a fire trap, I want to know about it.
Well, and that's the other component to that is if you have a long-term rental, somebody is in that 365 days a
And
year.
they're just at risk
They're at more risk than a short-term rental that's only rented 3 nights a week.
and then they're gone.
Okay, now we're almost at 8:30.
That's pretty good.
So let's make it end at 8:30.
Well, we started a half hour later, so.
So do we, is the planning commission okay with helping us with language for the longer term?
And do
If
you
there is
want-
anything that,
I think we ought to vote on it in our next meeting and get back to you.
We'll go outside and let you vote real quick.
I just think that
Barbara, yes.
We want a monitoring component to it.
the long term,
Yeah, I think that's.
yeah, I mean, I
Kind of what we.
there's already a governing
So they have to fill
facility
out
out
an
there.
application once a year.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that
I mean, that's kind of what we want in general. Is
once
monitoring.
a year application?
Yeah,
And
So
if you're gonna have long-term
information.
rentals, so we know what's out there, and then that will lead
Same
into
way.
whether or not they're doing what they're supposed to.
Same way for the enforcement provisions, same way, you gotta file it. If you don't file it, it's so, okay.
Well, hang on a second, Mary. Doesn't that fall into the state's purview? And
I
can
don't
we
know.
actually?
That's what you're gonna
That's what
tell.
we're gonna
Oh,
find out.
thanks.
Yeah.
We've already done this, by the way, with the subdivision ordinance.
Yes.
That's why I wanted to say earlier,
Yes.
before we went through all of this, that we could do that if we separate them out and
Yes.
just. follow it.
Because
Okay.
we don't, right now, we don't know what there is for long-term rentals and whether there's any government, I don't think they have to register with the state of Vermont. I think that if you have a long-term rental, it doesn't come up on the radar until you have a bad tenant and you're trying to get rid of them, and that tenant already knows that, hey, you can't throw me out.
Well.
Yep.
Okay,
But
we
that'll
do,
be-
well, there's other stuff that
Right.
you have to do. Okay, so the select board wins because we out-talked you. That was because I wouldn't let you speak. I just let the select board speak, so.
In spite of my best efforts.
Anything else? Are we getting the gist of what you wanted us to take from this? Any final comments?
Have we changed anything drastically from
Yeah.
what you guys put together?
Do we really put a misstep anywhere in here?
We've taken a few circles, but we've come back around.
And I
Okay.
think it's just those those 6 items in that first page
Yeah,
that
and then, well, see, we did.
we
little
tweaked all the
tweaks.
rest of it, but yeah.
Okay, so, we're gonna, actually, we are looking at Bill to do a revision. I've got to do some work on and not offending anyone in section 1
1
or
or
section
2.
2.
Yeah. The
Um,
purpose is I think the
okay.
most stymieing thing. Why are we doing this?
Okay,
And make it,
okay. All right.
I know why, but
I'll
it's
make
hard-
a draft so you can,
And then the other thing for us, if we're gonna do this, would be to put this on our agenda and have like a half-hour discussion, either at the beginning, the middle, or I would say at the end of our meeting,
yeah,
so that we don't keep telling people, but
okay,
try not to, or if you want to call for a night when we just talk about this.
okay. Didn't we just do that?
That's for this, right, but
Maybe we need a little-
it's gonna be up to you how you want us to
Thank you.
revise that section.
Well,
2.
no, I mean, I want buy-in on this.
Right, but
So,
do we tie it in with a regular board meeting or just have a night
Okay.
when we do it?
Maybe have a light night and,
Right.
not,
The other
a
night
big,
would've been a
One.
perfect.
not a
Count
big
the-
loaded up night on the. agenda.
one
Having
light
vacation,
night.
you gotta go on a late night. That's
So, but
All right.
I think
So-
that's
Okay.
made the
Well, let's
most
put
progress.
draft in front of us.
Yep.
Let's see where we are.
You correct.
hearing.
And-
It's on me to get to the.
It is
Yeah.
pretty much, but we gotta get
Yes.
through townwide celebration.
Yeah, get-
You're all invited to townwide celebration on
We're gonna start
Saturday.
right the same.
festivities at 10 and we'll go till 2 for most things. Many of you are participating. I know the energy folks have some really good stuff. Planning commissions put together good things. Matt and I are on the grills, so don't forget to get your free food while you're there. Lots of stuff. I got the fire departments there. Hathaway Farms has got the little trolley thing they're going to be driving around. And let me end the way I started, which is we are really, really grateful to the Planning Commission for all of the work you've put into this and into so many other things we have thrown at you. I have
They keep changing.
utmost respect for you, and that's why we keep throwing things at you, because we figure you're the folks who can straighten it out and give us what we need. So thank you all very much.
So our work is pretty much done with the short-term rentals. You'll be working with Bill.
Yeah.
Sorry, Bill.
I think so.
I think so.
Okay.
Occasionally, yeah.
I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion's made and seconded.
I.
Aye. Aye.